Good morning, welcome to our live talk program. This is Lloyd Grober here, your host on Revive Reform Radio, doing our live talk program covering current events on your Thursday morning, Rise and Shine. Current events is more here we're looking at. And we're looking at this topic about this discussion or event that's going on entitled Britain's Windrush Generation Threatened with Deportation. So Britain's Windrush generation threatened with deportation is what we're looking at, and just looking at the general atmosphere in westernized worlds towards immigrants. And this issue here will summarize what's going on. So welcome again to our talk program. Hopefully you had a blessed night rest and you're ready to take on today. Let's pray. Our Father who art in heaven, we thank thee again for the blessings of your word, your ways, and your will. Pray, Lord, that we might understand and be able to live and do the things that we ought to do for the blessings of our lives and for our salvation. Be with us, we pray, as we look into these things. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're looking here. I have two articles I want to share with you this morning about what's going on in Britain and what's happening over there with some of the controversies that has to do with Britain's Windrush generation threatened with deportation. And the British Windrush generation are people that was brought to Britain after World War II, and they were brought there to rebuild England after the war. And many of them were coming from various different Commonwealth countries. Commonwealth countries are countries that normally at that time the citizens of those countries were what you call citizens of Britain, and they were part of the British Empire, and they were brought there by the British monarchy to rebuild various different cities, just rebuild the whole country, and that's what they were brought there for. And they were brought there from primarily Jamaica, Trinidad, and other islands, and so these are immigrants that were there, and now because of some rules and laws that they put in place, and I'm assuming these laws were put in place for them to get rid of illegal immigrants, I guess, in general, but probably they were targeting primarily people who were illegal, and then I guess Muslims, I'm assuming. I don't know exactly why. I haven't read anything that clearly states why. So some new immigration clampdown laws were put in place, and so these people who were brought there to rebuild the country, and they were brought there from in the 40s. The article is going to clear that up. And all the way until the 1970s are now being kicked out. So these are older people that have been in the country for 40, 50 years. So this is what we're going to look at this morning here. I have two articles to share just for your thinking here, to broaden your thinking. To broaden your thinking as what is happening there, and how what we see here are similar movements. Now in Proverbs, I start out by reading an encouraging text to you in Proverbs chapter 14 verse 34. Proverbs 14 verse 34 simply says, righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Righteousness exalted a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. So that's important to note, that righteousness, doing the right thing, exalt a nation. When a nation does what is right, and since our topic is about the deportation of people from the Caribbean, it is important to note is to do what is right, what is moral, what is the righteous thing. Often people say, but the law. Yeah, but it's important to note righteousness, exalt a nation, doing the right thing. You might not be bound by law, but doing the right thing is the right thing. I guess an example of this, if you thinking with me here, an example of this would be like a guy who had a live-at-home person, lived with her for, say, 5 years, 10 years, and in that time had her, taking care of kids, cleaning the house, cooking, and she wasn't doing her career. And then he gets upset with her. He says, look, I'm going to move on, break up with you. and just kick her out on the street. Legally, she got, she got nothing because there's no paperwork legally. And all those years of, whatever she did for him, legally she has no claim, and nobody can force him to say, the lady took care of you, making sure that you could get up and go to work, have your whatever, cook, whatever. And she didn't get anything because there's no legality to bind you to do anything for her. But at the end of the day, it might not be the legal thing to do, but it's the moral thing to do. It's the righteous thing to do, is to take care of the person, give the person some type of compensation, let the person fall on their feet, provide somewhere for them to live and so forth, even to tie them over for a few months. That's the moral thing to do. That might not be the legal thing. No court can force the person to do anything. But that's life. And sometimes we can argue stuff about legality, but legality, for the most part, is not no heart with it. There's no heart, there's no soul. The person's lost their moral bearings and their soul. They have sold their soul to the devil. And so that's why it's important to consider this when we consider something like this. Because many people will argue, before I even read the first statement from any of these articles, that is not the legal requirement. But it's sometimes not so much what is legal, what is honorable, having integrity, having some self-respect and decency about oneself. So I'm going to read the two articles for you, and then I'm going to go into some Bible texts and some thoughts on the back end, just to bring you up to speed about what's happening in these westernized countries and how they're treating those that have put in hard labor and paid taxes and helped build their country. So Britain's Windrush generation threatens with deportation. This is taken from NBC News, and it is, many have been in the UK so long that they assumed they would never need to present documentation to prove they were in the country legally. Jamaican-born Beverly Booth followed her parents to Britain in 1979. She says her mother and father both had UK citizenship. She hasn't left the country since. So it was a shock when Booth, now 56, got a letter informing her that she would be deported from where she studied, worked, raised 5 children. This is my life here. I got my children. I got my grandkids, she told NBC News. Booth isn't alone. Thousands of similar cases have emerged, unleashing a scandal that has engulfed British Prime Minister Theresa May. Other Caribbean-born UK residents, including many who are elderly, say they have been threatened with deportation, with some detained and denied access to health care and benefits. The revelation has prompted accusation that the government has betrayed a generation of Black Britons who helped rebuild the country following the devastation wreaked by World War II. They became known as the Windrush generation after the ship that brought the first 492 passengers from Jamaica, Trinidad, and other islands to Britain in 1948. A total of 500,000 workers and their families were eventually invited to the UK from former colonies and granted citizenship as subjects of the empire. Many of them have been in the country so long that they assumed they would never need to present documentations to prove they were in UK legally. The scandal was exacerbated last week when it emerged that many of the Windrush generation original landing documents had been deliberately destroyed by the UK's Interior Minister, known as the Home Office. In 2009, this happened. In many cases, this was a key piece of evidence needed to prove an individual's citizenship status. The Home Office destroyed the evidence that gives people the opportunity to say, look, of course I'm British. Opposing lawmaker David Lammy said, "It's very, very hard when you ask these people in their 60s to go back to the 1950s and 60s and find their documentation." Critics blame official incompetence and callousness, as well as an immigration crackdown introduced by May when she was in charge of the Home Office from 2010 until 2016. May pledged to create a hostile environment, that's a quote, in order to deal with illegal immigration. But many now say the policies have created problems for those in the country legally too. As a result, rather than simply being certified by officials at the border, people's status now has to be checked by banks, landlords, employers, and others. People face fairly intrusive immigration checks in every aspect of their lives, says Sabir Singh, the chief executive of the Joint Council of Welfare of Immigrants, a British legal charity. Many people who have every right to be in the UK don't necessarily have all the paperwork. Critics says that as a result of a demand for paperwork, the Windrush generation and their children have lost jobs, been denied access to life-saving cancer treatment, made homeless, and as in Booth's case, threatened with deportation. Booth says her parents arrived from Jamaica as Commonwealth citizen, member of Britain's overseas empire that largely dissolved after the Second World War, who were legally allowed to come to Britain, to UK, as citizens under the United Kingdom colonies. Booth followed them as a teenager in 1979 on a Jamaican passport. In 1980, Booth said she was given indefinite leave to remain, which granted her the right to live, work, and study in Britain as a result of her parents' status. Her problem started when she lost her passport, stamped with the evidence that she needed to prove she was in the country legally, and received a deportation notice by mail in 2013. Then came relentless phone calls telling her she had to leave. This was just out of the blue, she said. It was horrible. Since then, she had provided birth and death certificate for her British family and her degree certificate in her attempt to prove her status. Both eventually received a short-term residency permit in 2015 and was able to get a job caring for elderly and sick people, but that has since expired. It's also affected her family. Despite her children being British citizens, they have struggled to get passports. She also says she hasn't been able to gain access to taxpayers-funded healthcare. The scandal has generated fury, according to the UK Lammy, the lawmaker, whose parents came from a former British colony of Guyana, organized a letter to the Prime Minister from more than 140 fellow members of Parliament expressing their concern. His impassioned speech at Parliament last Tuesday, is which Islam May's successor to the Home Office, Amber Rudd, was widely shared on social media and described as a national shame. Lammy continues to parallel with President Donald Trump moves to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival or DACA program. It's exactly the same rhetoric that we've seen from Theresa May, pandering to a new far-right temperament that has grown up in Britain. The system has become infected. May later apologized to Caribbean leaders and especially a task force which on Saturday has investigated more than 280 cases. She also said the government would compensate those affected. On Monday, Rudd told Parliament that 2,000 cases out of a total of 8,000 had been reviewed so far, she said no one had been found to have been wrongly deported, although she described some of the cases as harrowing. Rudd said that the fees of obtaining citizenship would be waived to anyone affected. Lamy responded by saying the Windrush generation were citizens when we invited them 70 years ago. All right, and so they're thinking that after 500,000 people from former colonies who came to Britain when they were citizens, they think 57,000 of them are especially vulnerable because their status is not formalized. And so this has been a problem. Also, if you remember, a few years ago, Britain had done what we call the Brexit, where they had split from the European Union, and they even in the past have tried to kick out and then have to apologize certain European Union people living in the country. And so this is this ongoing thing here. This is that first article. I'll stop there in the article that of what's going on. So basically, the one of the parliamentarians is comparing it to what's happening here also in America, where based upon the will of many people in this country, the DACA, the deferred action, children that were brought here are being told that they have to leave. And then all the people with a temporary protective status visas are being told they have to leave. They believe Honduras is next up on the chopping block. And so this is important because if you notice here how they clamp down, and this is for years I've been saying that when people read what we call the national son-in-law, and I'm saying all this before I get to the next article that will expand the subject, but just think about what they say, how they implemented this, and they clamped down. They clamped down most actually with the immigration system, the police, and so forth. But notice how they did it where your status now has to be checked by banks, landlord, your employers, and others. So, because over the years, I remember people would talk about, the national son-in-law, and they talk about how if America had to basically suspend its constitution, and they would have to clamp down on people who were, say, commandment keeping people, how difficult would it be? And if you understand, it would not be very difficult because, this is a good example of how it's easy to do. All you have to do is just lock the person. Because remember, you can't buy or sell. That's the premise of the mark of the beast. You can't buy or sell. So how do you enforce that? Just basically, if the citizens agree. And it's a citizen law. That's what citizens want, that certain people need not to be part of our system. So how do you lock people out of the system? If the citizens want them locked out. So you go to the bank, and the bank look at you and say, you got to prove that you're a citizen. So you can't open up a bank account. Or you can't access your bank account. So your money becomes frozen. You go to your landlord, and landlord says you got to show paperwork that you are a citizen. So you can't rent. You can't buy a house because if you can't show citizens, you can't get any money from the bank. So if you don't already own a house, you're done. If the town says, well, you can't pay tax, well, you can't own a house. So you're out of the system. Also notice your employers, if you can't show show your citizenship where you can't get a job. So you're out of the system again. And other services. So you can see how quickly a person just get locked out of the system. So normally when they talk about this, they talk about it as if the government is going to do something. And over the years, I remember showing people that no, if you read the Bible and you study it well, and you read the Spirit of Prophecy, there's nowhere she's saying that it's going to go like that. And just to clarify that the government passes the rule, but especially in the United States, is a government by the people and for the people. It's what the people want. That's why they do surveys. If the people say this is what we want, that's the rule that is passed. And whoever is in power is based on power basically upon what the people want. So if you have a president in the country, the president represents what the country wants. even if some people are silent about it, but they want it. And that's the pulse of the people. So the British people not only wanted exit from European Union, but they wanted all these illegal people. And I'm assuming probably the bigger target here would be the Muslims with all the attacks and stuff that was going on. They want them out, but they want all these illegal out. Because remember, if you're doing financially well, you can have some people to serve your table and pick your tomato. But if you're doing financially bad, you want to be able to put the kibosh. But what they end up doing here, they put a pressure on people that help rebuild the country. I don't think that was the intention, but it could be the intention, because they said that they purposely destroyed the records of the land and paper for these people. So to me, if you say you purposely destroy the records, that means you wanted to kick them out. But imagine you're kicking out people out of the country that was there to rebuild your country after World War II, after it was bombed. And they came to rebuild it, and they're now old people who haven't seen the country that they left. Which, just an example, Jamaica, these people left Jamaica in the 40s and in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. They're in a foreign country now, they're getting old, they're getting sick, they've put their young years of work to help rebuild Britain. And then now you're kicking them out back to a country that now, when they left that country in the 40s, it was part of the British Empire. Now it's an independent country that they didn't put a day's work in to build. So now you send them back to those countries that they didn't put no work. They built England. They built the tax base and the retirement base and the welfare system in England with their hard labor. And now England's going to send them back to a country that they didn't put a dime in. So this is what we're dealing with. This is a type of mindset of people. So it's important to note the people you're living with. As a matter of fact, the parliamentarian Lammy, one of the videos I was watching, the parliamentarian Lammy was saying to the British Parliament that basically it's because Mays has lied with dogs and she has caught fleas, or the whole country has caught fleas, and put in these kind of draconian laws. But when you think about it, is when you think about people who are, I guess, hurting people, hurt other people, this is what's going on. So one has to know what's coming, because for years, the Bible is very clear what will happen here. And it's saying this is what will happen. And people are trying to interpret it to say, no, it's not going to happen this way, it's not going to happen this way. Let me tell you something. What the Bible says is very clear. It's going to be the will of the people to go up against and to persecute and kill and enslave and put in prison people who keep the commandment of God and have the faith of Jesus. That's what the Bible teaches me. And it's very clear. You can see the type of cold, calculated evil that can come when people just, want for themselves, and they couldn't care less about any others. Selfishness and love of money. Second article here, this is from The Nation now, and this is just an opinion piece, a person looking, I guess, in a hopeful way of probably something good is going to come of all of this. And this is entitled The Veneration of the Windrush Generation. The UK government's treatment of elderly Black Britons from the Caribbean is a scandal, but their elevation to national treasure offers hope. So he's saying all of a sudden they're now elevated to national treasure. And this is written by Gary Young from thenation.com. So Paulette Wilson, 61 years old, came to Britain from Jamaica in 1968. So that was before I was even born. At that time, just for you to note, Jamaica, if I'm getting it clear, was still a person would hold a passport for Britain because it was part of the British Kingdom. Paulette Wilson, 61, came to Britain from Jamaica in 1968 when she was just 10 to live with her grandparent. She never left, living legally in the country for the next 50 years, attending school, serving meals at the House of Commons. So this would be like serving meal, I think, at the Senate or the House of Representatives. House of Commons, and to the homeless at her church and becoming grandmother. Then in 2015, Wilson received notice that she was an illegal immigrant and would be sent back to Jamaica, a country where she didn't know anyone. She was not taken to a detention center. Sorry, she was taken to a detention center, and only a last-minute legal reprieve kept her in the UK. Quote, I wondered what was going to happen to me as all I did was cry, thinking of my daughter and granddaughter, thinking that I was going to see them again. I wasn't going to see them again, she told reporters. Wilson's story ended up being a first of many such tales in what has become the biggest immigration scandal in the UK in decades, prompting a flurry of apologies at the highest level. It's a scandal that could yet take down the British Prime Minister and force a reckoning with the xenophobic immigration laws put in place over the past 5 years. Another person affected by those laws, and by the way, there's the main picture of this article is this lady Paulette Wilson standing with her, I guess her new or old British passport. Another person affected by those laws was Michael Braithwaite, 66, a grandfather who came to Britain from Barbados in 1961 at the age of 9. He worked his entire life only to lose his job as a special needs teaching assistant after a routine immigration check. A third was a 63-year-old Albert Thompson, not his real name, who came from Jamaica as a teenager and lived in London for 44 years, only to be evicted from his council house because he couldn't prove citizenship. Thompson was also denied cancer treatment by the National Health Service unless he paid £54,000 or 75,000 US dollars. All of these people and many others are emerging are in the country legally. Indeed, many essentially arrived when British passports became because the country they came from were not yet independent. Nearly all of them lost access to housing, healthcare, pension. Some were handed bills for service they had used. Amazingly, none of this was a mistake. In 2014, the Conservative government passed an Immigration Act underpinned by a hostile environment, quote again, policy aimed at undocumented immigrants. The goal was to make life so hellish that people would, in Mitt Romney's word, self-deport. The British government even sent vans around black neighborhoods in London with the message, in the UK illegally, go home or face arrest. The legislation effectively made any Brit, health professional, teachers, employers, landlord, a border guard, authorizing and sometimes required to check your immigration status. And it made every immigrant a suspect until they could prove they were legal. So I pause here in the article. Very important. So when you think about like a police state, I know it's probably difficult for a person because I remember over the years I'll hear conspiracy theorists speak. You can go back and look at some of the archival footage of various conspiracy theorists on YouTube and various different methods that would speak, and they would normally talk about the police state. And if you ever heard this type of talk, they talk about the police state, and now the guys with the brown shirt, and they're normally white males who would make this type of speech, and they always worried about the police state. And I would think about it. I was thinking about it. I said, well, from my study, what I just read there is more in line with how I see it. But they see it as the state. They don't see it as regular citizens and church members and your regular Joe. they see it as the state, that the state is going to do this and we have to protect ourselves, because they always worry that their rights are going to be infringed upon. And I'm always like, but what are you talking about? There's people in America whose rights are always being infringed upon. People in the ghetto, people in poor communities, they always being surveilled and targeted and arrested at high rates for crimes that they're doing at smaller percentage than the rest of the white citizenry. But they would always talk this, and I would be like, am I missing something? Because the people in prison for the most part for drugs are blacks. But who is using the drugs like anything else? 2 times, according to the CDC, 2 times the usage of drugs, whites than blacks, per population representation. But yet you go to the prisons and you be like, man, you would think all the drug users and dealers in America are blacks. So that's, to me, was this what they were talking about, this type of, if I can't even remember the name of it, because when I hear these things, I used to think these people are so ridiculous and silly. The police state, the deep state, all of this that's their system. Anyhow, so when you look at this, you see now, this is what we're talking about. This is, to me, where you talk about martial law and suspend of the Constitution and all that. Notice the legislation effectively made anybody that was a citizen, health professional, teachers, employers, landlord, a border guard. So your teacher in your classroom is a border guard. Anybody that employs, anybody that rent, the doctor, the dentist is a border guard. That's a draconian state. And that, to me, is the beauty of reading this and see that. Over the years, I've been saying to people, they've been looking at me like I have 2 horns or something, I'm crazy. I'm like, just think about it. If you're in the ghetto and you've been investigated and cars always swirling around and everybody keeps saying, you the drug dealer, you the drug user. And you'll be like, really? So all the drugs coming in America has been just in the ghetto consuming it? Look at this now. Health professional, teachers. Let me ask you this. You think that every time a person came into a bank, and if a white person came into a bank and talking with a British accent, and a black person came in talking a British accent, who would they check? Who would that bank check for immigration status? Who you think? You think they were going to check the person from Jamaican descent or the person who is a white-skinned person speaking with British accent? Because they say they're making it that they're going after illegals, but who would you assume? They would say, Lord, it's obvious. You profile the person that is dark skinned. And that's what it is. So what ended up happening? They just basically push that dragnet out and they grab everybody that is a certain way. And that's why it's easy to enforce these laws. So if you think about something now like the mark of the beast, who would you go after? You go after the person that dress a certain way, talk a certain way, carry themselves a certain way, eat a certain way. It's easy to profile. It would be easy to find out somebody go to church a certain day of the week, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be easier to profile. It's just like if you've been following the debate with the homosexual debate, gay marriage and all that. It's easy to know who is for it and who is not for it. First, you just have to ask, you Christian? You just narrow down the group by who is against homosexuality. And then you say, well, you're black Christian, higher percentage of black Christians are against homosexuality. It's easy to find out who is for or something against this thing. Profiling is very easy. But who they were profiling now here was going to be people who were from Caribbean country. So continue reading the article. It says, so someone like Braithwaite, who'd never had a passport, was suddenly asked to produce 4 pieces of documentation for every year he had been in the country, stretching back over 50 years. And when he couldn't, he lost his job. I don't care who you ask this. If you said to somebody, produce 4 documents every year, stretching back over 50 years, obviously you're done. Even the British High Commissioner to Trinidad and Tobago had the passport application for his Trinidadian-born infant son rejected. You cannot be more British than the British High Commissioner, but he wasn't British enough, tweeted diplomat who managed to sort it out, compared to the experience of many deserving British residents. My problems were trivial, but it illustrates a home office that defaults to refusal wherever possible. This was not a glitch in the system, it was the system. Indeed, the architect of this policy is now the Prime Minister, Theresa May. She can be forgiven for being taken aback by the recent response. The law was enacted at the time when xenophobia was running high, with a handful of exceptions, current Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn being one of them. Labour supported the law back then. It seemed there was no political price to pay for being hateful towards immigrants. So I pause there again, because think about it. The person that was most draconian against immigrants was the person that became the Prime Minister of Britain. So there is a benefit to this. So that tells you that if you can tap in, whether it's good or bad, if you can tap into the general feeling of the population and give them a law that is representative of that feeling they're going through, or that opinion that they have, you'll be their next leader. And that's important to note, because I think this is where the problem lies when you read Revelation 13 verse 11 onward. Because with Revelation 13:11, one could interpret it, that passage of scripture, the mark of the beast scripture, and you could say it's gonna happen based upon the state. In other words, the leaders of the country enforce laws to hurt God's people who are moral and people who live by the Bible. You could interpret that way. Or you could interpret it that the leaders are leading based upon by popular demand. In other words, if you know the pulse of the people, you teach, or you politic, or you preach based upon the pulse of the people. And you will basically, somebody will say it's the leader of the country that wanted it. Or you could understand what's going on and say, no, the person that became the leader is the person that got the pulse of the people right. They understood what the people wanted, and they gave the law based upon what the people wanted. It's important. As you know, probably, that the idea of separation of church and state in the United States is trending at about 52% the last time I checked. There's a plurality in the country that would want to overthrow the Constitution and the freedom of religion. It's a plurality. But that plurality is with any survey, there is what you call like a plus or minus 3%. So that's not a plurality enough to overcome at this point. In other words, if you went and say, we don't want church and state to be separated right now in America, and it came down to a vote, it could go any way. Because that means at 52%, you could have a 55% vote yes, or you could have a 49% vote yes. It could go either way. It's not in the clear thing. The moment you start hitting anything above 55, you have a plurality. And a person now who is a political leader who wants to get into power could politics on that policy and know that a plurality of people will vote yes the moment it goes above 55. But this is where you put on your platform based upon plurality, not necessarily based upon what is the right platform, because you see leaders do it all the time. I was watching recently a piece of documentary about a past governor of Alabama and how he was respectable towards black people, but he ran for the governor and lost. And then after he lost, the next time he ran, he became a segregationist. And then he ran for the presidency of the United States, I think 3 times, as a segregationist. And after he was shot, I can't remember his name, but after he was shot, he decided that he was for black people again. And he repented, and his wife had died of cancer. So he suffered some tragedies in his life. And he was a guy that run against Johnson, Nixon, and Jimmy Carter. So if you look at that, you will see people can basically, a politician can craft his message based upon the people. But normally what we hear the conspiracy theorists teach is that they teach it a different way. They teach it that it's the government that does it. They don't teach it that it's the government readjusting to the will of the people according to how they check the pulse of the people. If you remember the story with Moses and Aaron, when Moses seemed to have a delay from, while receiving the commandments, Aaron checked the pulse of the people by their anger, and instead of checking the people and said, "No, brethren, this is not right what we're doing here," Aaron said, "Hey, let's make a golden calf." Was the golden calf his idea? Yes. But did he get the people right? Yes. And he gave it according to what he knew the people want. The difference between him and Moses, now Moses said, "Nope, we're not going to do that." And as a matter of fact, a few you're going to have to die because of this. And he checked the rebellion. So why is this important before I finish reading the article? Because if you have a group of people that has worked to help build your country and build a tax base and build the infrastructure, it might not be the legal thing to do, but the moral thing to do is to say, "You know what, Ben? Thank you guys. I'm gonna compensate you. I'm gonna take care of you guys." But you could check the will of the people. The will of the people is like covetous and hateful. And you could say, "Well, I'm gonna tap into the people, and I know if I'm harsh against these people, I will have the support and I will have the veneration. I'll be their new hero." That's what basically Theresa May did. She tapped into the sentiments of the people who, as you know, Britain is more and more losing its financial base. The people are getting more broke. As you tap into that, you're going to get pushed to power. But somebody will say, "Well, it's all her." But I said, no, it's the people. She's just tapping into the sentiment. And why this is important, you say, well, why is it important? It's important because when now God act, and God, as the Bible says, vengeance is mine, and God does things, don't never side with evildoers and simpletons and saying, why did God do that? You got to understand, there is still somebody above all of this that will balance things out and will settle stuff. That's why the Bible says, just pray and just keep doing what you're doing. God will settle this. Because this type of stuff is robbery. Because a person, as I say, that was brought to the country, worked all their life, and they helped build the country after it was devastated by a war. You just can't turn around and say, well, on a technicality, we destroy the paperwork, and since, you all are old people, you don't probably pay attention and keep your paperwork up to date, we're going to kick you out to a country that you never put a day's work in because you came here when you were young. And we're going to kick you back out there, and you're going to have to figure it out. It might be legal, and it's the will of the people. But when you do something like that, then God comes and says, well, we're going to have to settle a score here. We're going to have to readjust. For the money that you stole from these people, I'm going to have to remove it out of the economy. And that's the type of thing that happened. So let me keep reading here. As several similar stories appear in the past 5 months, the conservative government eventually calculated that the handful of elderly Caribbean-born black folks who couldn't get their paperwork together would hardly pose a threat. So they already calculated, they say, at one point, hey, what's the big deal? Then, in mid-April, the dam broke in the national imagination. There has been demonstration and large meetings in favor of these immigrants across the country. Quite what broke the dam is not clear. I don't know why it's not clear. It appears these Caribbeans have become good immigrants who stumbled into a line of xenophobic fire. They became known as the Windrush generation, named after the HMT Empire Windrush, a ship that brought mostly Jamaican servicemen to the UK in 1948, making the symbolic beginning of a post-war migration to Britain from its former colonies in the Caribbean. The reverence from the Windrush generation as employed since the scandal came to light has been surprising to many of us who follow race politics. And the person who's writing mother was from that generation, but it's been especially astonishing for them. They came of age in Britain during a period of intense and open racial hostility, with segregated bars, police harassment, and episodic racial violence. But their elevation to a national treasure is, in recent weeks, as often as offered hope on two fronts. First, that Britain is not immune to a compassionate conversation about immigrants. For 2 weeks solid, we had been talking about the taxes they paid, the communities they created, the nation they helped build, and the fact that their arrival changed it for better. The second, it offers hope that we might be able to take that revelation and apply it to more recent immigrants. The government's apologies thus far have been tailored to the Windrush generation. The message is, in essence, has been, quote, the hostility wasn't meant for you, it was meant for someone else, end of quote. But now the human cost of such a policy have been illustrated in a way that people can relate to. And so we might be able to shift the way in which the debate has been framed. That may seem likely, but in a world where elderly, working class black people touch the conscience of the Western nation, anything is possible. End of story. So, as I said, this is ongoing right now. But as the authors say, it's a might. I particularly not want to believe that that's in essence what's going to happen. Because remember, Theresa May had tapped into the reality of what's happening to poor people in Britain, poor whites and so forth. So that has not changed. So because that has not changed, this might be something that is something to talk about at the water cooler. And it's a watershed moment. It's a moment for you to realize how brutal these policies are and how people can basically en masse get up and start going after others who have benefited their country. As I say, they have paid into the system. They have rebuilt the physical country, and now they're being asked to. This to me is important to note that if they can do that to them, they can do that to less than. And that's why you have to, as I say, if you're on a plane and you know that the plane at a certain point is going to kick you out of the plane in mid-flight, then you probably board that plane with a parachute and you keep that parachute on you, because you know that at a certain point they can pick you up out of your seat, open the doors and boot you out. So you keep the parachute. That's very important. But if you don't know, you're going to sit comfortably and going to enjoy the ride, and you're not going to have a parachute on your back, because in your mind, you're secure. You're going to be with these people that you're flying with until the plane land, and you're going to say, thank you, pilot. You're going to walk through the front door of the plane. You're going to leave. But if you know that says, this is the type of mindset, then you kind of like, I think about to save up some money and buy myself a parachute, because when this plane is up midway and I'm enjoying the flight, I might see somebody grab me by the shirt and yank me up my seat and then open the door and kick me out. And I might land and don't have nowhere to land. But it's important to note. And why it's important to note? Because as you know, in Daniel chapter 2 tells us a very important story. It tells that these kingdoms that rule the world, and Britain was the most prominent one of the 10 toes that end up being the 7 major kingdoms in Europe after the breakup of the Roman Empire. It describes them as, in Daniel chapter 2, towards the end there, it describes them as being, mixed with iron and clay, and it's partly broken. And as we can see that over the years, as the British Empire lost power, and Europe waned in its power, that it went from having colonies that were the members of the colonies were citizens to having colonies that are basically independent and they're part of the Commonwealth of Britain, not the common poor, although they were really common poor. And then after that, now they basically saying you're independent of everything, whatever you contributed to the power and the good life of the British citizens. Thank you, but see you later, and you're on your own. And they've cut them really loose while keeping them as Commonwealth, so they can still control and still contribute to the wealth of Britain. That's what's happening. And because of this, it's important to note that it's basically every man for themselves. And this is the type of attitude. We see this idea again in Daniel chapter 7. And in Daniel chapter 7, verse 26, and notice here it speaks about the European empire. That's how I understand it. And it says, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. It's like the empire and its leading entity, which was really not, it was really the Pope, but the Britain was what you call probably the powerhouse within the entity empire. It refers to it as we come closer to the end, that his empire being, let me read it the way it says it, is the dominion and empire. Dominion is his control, is being consumed and destroyed to the end. And as we look at what's going on in these empires, we can see there's a crumbling. The whole moral fabric, the whole power base that it has, it's crumbling. And when things start to crumble, people start to get isolationist. They start to protect themselves. When you're losing power, you're starting to see what you can hold on to. And as they kind of push away from from European Union, they're pushing away, talking about the British Empire, they're pushing away from trying to kick out all the people that are there that are like guests or immigrants or legal or illegal. And they're clamping down. And they're basically boxing themselves in a corner because they have to hold on to what they have. And to limit the bleed because money's being burnt. And why is this important? Because think about it. When Britain was going to other countries, pillaging and taking all the money, everything's good, so to speak. But as it's losing power, that kind of selfishness is like, no, I need to protect my own. And I need to take care of my own, and cutting deals and basically cutting their former friends out of the deal. And that to me is tell you that there's more trouble coming, because this is the same type of problem that Britain is facing, but the same type of problem America is facing, because America is waning in power. If you notice what it's doing the same thing. It's like becoming protection. It's hitting up its protections. It's putting up want to pull up walls, want to deal with the immigrants that are in its borders. And it's becoming isolationist in its thinking, nationalistic. Now we have people protesting in the street and they're calling themselves nationalists, and they want to protect theirs. And I find it ironic because I remember growing up, the idea was being pushed by America was capitalism. You must have free market. You must open your market to others. And I remember this was, you got to divest of all national interests. You can't pick winners. The government should not be involved in certain private sector companies. This was what the principles that America espoused. And I realized they did that because if you open your market, you, as a small island, your market is open, and now you have to go up competitively against big conglomerates from United States. You lose, and then they take over your market. So I realized it wasn't about what's the best interest of others, it was about the best interest of them. So you see people always do things for their best interest. You have to watch out, and you have to watch them because they're selfish and they're wicked. Because I remember this, and I remember when the market, before the market crash, when President Bush did the tax for the gas guzzlers to bail out the big manufacturers over there in Detroit that make cars. Then after the financial crash, They bailed out the banks. They bailed out the big car industry. And I thought this was anti-American. This was something that you never do. But I remember President Bush and President Obama signed off on bailing out the big banks. Then again, when they had a financial problem recently, under President Obama, they bailed out Wall Street again, and they made laws that were favorable. I remember under President Bush, they changed the bankruptcy laws to protect the banks. And I was like, everything I remember grew up hearing that you did and that was espoused by America to foreign countries to make sure they could pillage their economy and keep America great while those countries' people became poor and impoverished. They were doing the opposite to save themselves. And I was like, I see what's going. It's basically human nature. It's not about what is morally right or what is legally right. It's just about what is self-preservation. But self-preservation never works. Because when you self-preserve and you think about it's me, you become blinded by selfishness. And you end up just you end up losing your moral ground, high ground, and you make yourself just look barbaric. And then you do things to bring on the wrath of God, because the wrath of God is revealed against the unrighteousness of men. That when you know these people have been in your country, they've built your country up, they work and did jobs that you wouldn't do. As you notice, one of the ladies that was in one of the articles, as I've been showing over and over again, that many of these women are here in America, there in Britain, working in nursing homes, taking care of old white people. And you do that for years, and then they come and say, well, thanks for your service and whatever, but you got to go. And you say, but you got to, after 40, 50 years, 60 years, you're going to kick these people out. It's just cold and heartless. And that's why self-preservation, to me, is one of those things that marks national decline. Because instead of saying, you know what, Ben, guys, you've been in our country. We have done all kind of stuff to destroy you as a people. We have enslaved you. It's talking about people from Jamaica now. We have enslaved you. We have made you commonwealth and pillage your country. We have given you all kind of debt through the World Bank. We've keep you guys broke. We kick you out and give you independence when you are no longer financially viable for us. We brought you to Britain. We have used it to build up our country after Hitler bombed it and destroyed it. And you've worked here all your life, even serving in Parliament, serving us food. And we're glad for the food you serve us. We enjoy some good cooking from you guys. And you guys have been a servant to us, and you've been the runt. You've basically broke your back for us. We've used it like a dog. We've abused you. You know what happened? Now we're going broke. We're in it together. We're going to take care of you, and you're going to take care of us. We've been into our low times with you guys, and you guys have been a good servant to us. You've been good dogs for us. We're going to give it back to you. We're going to take care of you guys. Nope. These people say we're going to kick you out. And we're going to treat you like less than. And I'm like, man, that's some terrible servants, lords or masters you have here. They're not kind. And that's just how I'm seeing what's going on. You know, it's no matter how much tomato you pick for these people, no matter how kind you are, they don't do right. But if you look at the men in the Bible, especially David, I was trying to find a text and I couldn't find it. I'm going to have to find it one day for you and share it. That when David was running around in the mountains, hiding from Saul, the men that attached themselves to David, the men that was his life, when it was time for him to go into the kingdom and enjoy the beauty of the kingdom, those men he brought with him and he took care of them. Even the men that were foreigners, he even told them, look, you guys are foreigners, you can leave. And I'm going to share that story with you because I want to show you what true Christianity is and why the evildoers in our society hate Christians. Because of David, a man of God, he said, you know what happened? You guys are foreigners, you can go. And the men said, no, we're with you, David. We're with you in a good time, with you in a bad time. When Absalom went after David again, David tell him, you guys, the glory is done. The fun is done. And that's the part I wanted to share. The fun is done, and Absalom probably is going to kill me. You guys can go. And they'll be like, no, David, you took care of us. We're with you in the struggle. We're with you in the highs and the lows. You are a master. We're going to stick with you. That's true integrity. David had integrity. David, I'll protect you guys. You guys have been good to me. You guys are not even Jews. Or you guys are foreigners. I'm going to take it. And they stick with David and David stick with them. That's true leaders. What Theresa May doing, what Donald Trump is doing. America will have to deal with God for that, because you can't take these people labor, and these people help build your country, build your houses, build up your farms, feed you, serve you in restaurants, do, take care of your old people for you, and then you turn around and just like kick them out like that. And you might say, well, we win because we're the greatest country in the world, we're the superpower, who gonna do anything about it? But as you know, most of the people in these countries don't believe in God. But I do, and I know God will settle these scores. And this is why you need to serve God, and don't be immoral, and don't lose your moral bearing, because if you don't do right, you might not, nobody might be able to hold you to account. But remember, there's a God, he'll hold you to account. That's why we believe in God. So I pray that God may bless you, that you stay on your moral ground, your high ground, and you stay on the Bible, and don't sell out for your fellow citizens, even if they want to sell out. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, again for your love towards us, and the blessing, dear Lord, of knowing thee, the only true God, knowing that there is a God, and that truly, dear God, we believe that your hand is upon these nations, and you do not allow things to go beyond a certain limit. May you bless us, dear Father, as we walk humbly before thee each day, and continue to be faithful to whatever you've set us to do. This is our task, and this is our work. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for being with me here on Revive Reform Radio. Looking forward to talking to you tomorrow morning, where we should talk about wisdom for living. Until then, I pray that you may continue to walk with the King.